Okay, today it's war story time again, and people on my YouTube channel seem to like war stories, and I know y'all like them too. So we're going to war story this one, and this is probably going to take us until about 12:30. That's when we started early, okay? So you're having the afternoon off, so you'll be okay with that, right? This is a Mustang. It was a 2002 model that was surging, and my notice it only had 11,000 miles on it. It was nearly brand new at the time. And all that. Come on, don't be reading the magazine while I'm telling war stories. You can read that later. Alright, so the EGR system is typically where I like to start looking for surges. The EGR actually is going to rob the engine of a little bit of a power. Well, what do we need EGR for, you folks that have had emissions? Remember?
Put the exhaust back through the manifold and burn gas.
Well, we're actually preventing it from forming one of the three noxious gases we're trying to control, and that would be oxides of nitrogen. So if you put some inert gas in there, there's not as much burning going on, so it doesn't go above 2,500 degrees in a combustion chamber, and it doesn't make oxides of nitrogen, and that's the reason we do that. Notice it's got the NOx over there that you're doing away with. This is a sort of a generic EGR thing. Right, here's your exhaust going out through your cat, and you're borrowing a little dab of exhaust, like 5% right here, and you're running it back into the intake stream. But they've kind of got this not done right, because typically every time it's going to be going in right behind the throttle body, or it'll have some fed in at each cylinder. Well, in this particular case, this Mustang had an EGR system like the one on this engine up here. It's got the EGR valve itself that lets the exhaust gas go in there. It's got this supply pipe that actually is going to give it the gas that it needs from right there. See, it's getting it from right there above that header. And then you got this little sensor here that's got 3 wires, and that sensor basically got reference voltage, signal, and signal return. And it's reading off of an orifice on either side of the, well, right here. This one here has been cut, so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. That one right there, there's a little orifice in there, and whenever exhaust gas starts to flow, they're going to have pressure that's going to go up on one side of the orifice and down on the other, and they use that for the computer feedback to determine whether EGR is flowing or not. So there are times when, if this thing is lying and it's not telling it that it's flowing like it should, in other words, if it's not telling the truth about flow, it may flow too much, and there's that kind of thing going on. And so that's not too terribly uncommon either. Well, it had a surge at road speed that would totally evaporate when you unplug the EGR valve. It was doing this, you know, going down the road, and you could unplug the EGR valve, it's smooth as silk. Another time I saw this was on a little Nissan that had a misfire code on cylinder number 1, because it had a separate EGR port going into each cylinder, and 3 of them were clogged up. The one that wasn't clogged up was misfiring, and you could feel it as a surge. But when you unhook the EGR, that surge would go away. On some of them with torque converter modulation, tired transmission fluid, or the wrong type, you know, like if you've got the transmission fluid without the friction modifier in it, and it's trying to modulate the compressor, the torque converter clutch, it will actually cause you to feel a surge. And you remember I mentioned the other day about that Eagle Summit that was surging, and I was thinking it was an engine problem because I'd never seen that before, and then I found out by hooking a dwell meter up to the torque converter wire that it was modulating the converter. And then the guy from New Orleans down there, the Chrysler rep, told us to put Mopar +4 transmission fluid in it, and that took care of it because they had friction modifier in it. After that, I saw it on some Tauruses. I would pick up on something that was an EGR surge feeling thing, but when I tapped the brake and dropped the torque converter out, it would go away. And just on a hunch, I poured a little bit of that stinky friction modifier in the transmission fluid, and all of that surging went away on that one. So one of the things that I got really irritated with the transmission guy about one time was he told a customer about a surge they didn't know they had. Sometimes a surge is hard to work out on one. And so, anyway, if you can see this, we got this Mustang's vacuum operated EGR system. You know, your activity is going to vary with engine load and vacuum availability. And that DPF EGR reading, that's that feedback sensor I was talking about. Might be higher or lower depending on the throttle angle and load. And 4-liter single overhead cab Explorers have a vacuum reservoir for the EGR system. Well, that didn't seem excessive enough to cause a surging problem. It was given this much EGR. That goes from about 0.6 of a volt on a metal sensor to about 4.5 volts or so. And on the little plastic sensors, it starts at 1 volt. One way or another, this was a new DPFE sensor, and we got the idea that, well, that's not an inaccurate signal because it's a new sensor and exhaust is flowing like it's supposed to be and all that. All right, so I was talking to Donnie, who was actually the one that was working on this, and I was helping him with it. And I said, do you remember how in the 3.8 liter central fuel injected engines that had the throttle body injectors on the Thunderbirds and stuff, they actually would surge a little bit because of intake, because of valve stem seal deposits on the spark plugs. And we could unplug the EGR and the surge would go away. You'd be fooled into thinking that you had part of the EGR system not working right, and you would actually, when you pull the plugs out, you'd find out, oh, fiddlesticks, these plugs are about half fouled with this puffy brown stuff. And so all we really need to do is do valve stem seals and put a set of plugs in. Now that valve stem seal deposits look like that. Anybody ever seen anything like that on a spark plug? That's valve stem seals that are doing that. Whenever you see that, it gets a little bit of oil on there, cooks it off, leaves a residue that's drying. And that looks like ice cream or something. It's not soft though. It's really hard and tough to get off of there. And that's just a close-up picture of what that stuff looks like. One that I was working on one time. So I told him, I said, why don't we, and I know this car's only got 11,000 miles on it, and I hadn't had time for the valve stem seals to coat the plugs with this crud, but why don't we pull the plugs out and have a look at them just to see what we see. Well, I remembered my brother had a 71 Thunderbird. This is the one I was talking to you about the other day. Had a 429 in it with 375 horsepower. It was the only one they made with that much horsepower. The rest of them had like, 200 horsepower or something like that. But anyway, he bought that car for $1,700 and it was a cream puff. It looked like that one except it was gray. I had to find that picture on the internet. I used to have a picture of it out here on one of these computers and I can't locate it now. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is he was driving his car and he came to me and he says, my Thunderbird is really running rough and all. It's cutting up and cutting out and all that. And so he felt like since it's got this high powered engine in it, and you can't get the kind of gas that there used to be out there anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and pour octane booster in it. So when I pull the spark plugs out, I found old rusty red looking stuff on the spark plugs, and it looked like that. See that cruddy stuff on them spark plugs? Now these spark plugs here are the ones we pulled out of the Mustang. And this old man that was driving this Mustang had been dumping octane booster in there. And it had coated his plugs with this hogwash, and it gets better. That stuff is kind of conductive. That's the problem with it. Whenever it starts to coat the plugs, the spark starts trying to run on that, which is almost like having the plug fouled with gasoline or something, but not quite as bad. And a closer look at that, you can see where the arcs were jumping from the center electrode down the side of that ceramic. You see that? You ever see a plug look like that? And it was that dusty red stuff that you can just see some of it on the top that was causing it. It was consistently firing to the side. He wasn't getting good flame propagation in his cylinders whenever he was on his power stroke. So this is called carbon tracking. Now, how many of you guys ever seen a carbon track in a distributor cap? What happens there is it starts to follow that carbon track. You also see them inside spark plug boots. You got one down the side of the plug, you pull the boot off, there'll be a matching one inside the boot. If you just put a plug in it, when you put that boot back on there, it's going to start popping again like it did down the same way. And the first time I ran into that, it kind of smacked me around a little bit. But anytime you see a carbon track on the plug, you may think it's a crack. But it actually, if the plug gets too much resistance between that center electrode and the other, and it's supposed to have no more than 8,000 ohms, but it's supposed to have, like from 3 to 8,000 would be my spec on the spark plugs. Now, we're going to go into that a little bit more later. This heavy carbon tracking was evident. So what we did on here was we put the plugs back in it, and we got a fresh tank of gas, and his surgeon was gone. Well, the next one we got here was a 2001 5.4 F-150 with 58,000 miles and an intermittent misfire. I did the IDS and pulled up which one was misfiring. I got the spark plug out. The first thing I did was measure the resistance of it from there to there, and I got 200 ohms, which is only a tiny fraction of what it's supposed to be. All right, that might seem like, well, 200 ohms ought to be just fine, but when I replaced that spark plug, that skip was gone. That's all it needed. You couldn't look at that spark plug and see anything wrong with it. And the funny thing about it was, and I've mentioned this before, when I published this article in Motor Age, I got a nasty email from a Champion spark plug engineer that said, that's a stupid way to check spark plug, you should never do that. Well, the Ford Motor Company has got this method in their training to measure and it's not supposed to be more than 8,000 ohms. I've even got a picture of it on the screen at the Ford Training Center. The funny thing was, I got a set of Champions, and I'm not throwing off on Champion spark plugs because I've used them. And and they actually make some, Champion makes some spark plugs for the 3-valve Fords that won't come apart when you take them out. That's something everybody ought to be doing. But I put all these Champion spark plugs from a brand new set that I got from the parts house on the bench, and I said, I'm just going to measure these and see what they've got. And they were from 2,000 to 17,000 and all over the place in between. I mean, so they got different criteria apparently.
I know, put them in a boat motor that pile out a lot.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I'm not here to trash Champion spark plugs, but what I'm saying is, this is a valid way to check spark plugs. And if I'm going to look for all of them to be really close, usually you'll see 3,000 to 5,000 ohms per plug. But if I'm measuring them all, I'm getting 3,000, 3,500, 4,000, and one of them is either wide open or almost shorted like this one, I'm going to say that's an issue and all that. So, but anyway, that's the deal on that. All right. We had also another one with an inoperative rear entertainment system, and I just love the way PowerPoint likes to throw bullets in front of everything when I paste it in there like that. But anyway, couldn't be activated by pressing the preset buttons on the radio. This is basically the player in the back that plays your videos, right? And it's factory, come on, so it comes over. The Ford audio system with the multiple control panels or remotely mounted receivers have got a circuit called ASYS on, audio system on, and that's a single wire that turns everything on whenever you turn on your radio. It wakes up all your amplifiers, it wakes up any other entertainment stuff so that it's awake and ready to go, and that kind of thing. So here we got this ASYS on wire, and what we found on that one was this 270 or C275 connector. If you look at it really close down there that was feeding that, you see those bent pins? See how those pins up there at the top are bent? It came like that from the factory. One of them was actually pushed back, and the rest of them were bent. So we straightened out all of those pins and pinched them with our little needle nose and plugged it back together, and we were able to reassemble the unit and watch a few minutes of a video on the TV. Now, the next thing I'm going to tell you about, and I don't have slides to go with it, but every now and then you'll have customers that will do a bait and switch thing with you. What's bait and switch mean? Anybody know? That's when you make somebody think you're doing something over here and you're actually doing it over there. That's what I call bait and switch. So the guy comes in, this is another piece of a war story, brings a pickup truck in on a trailer. Kind of like y'all brought that Camaro in on a trailer. Brings it up on a trailer and unloads it. And he said, I was driving my truck the other day and it just quit on me going down the road. And it wouldn't start. So he said, so I loaded it up, I brought it up here, made a work order on it at the Ford place, and I walked out there. I usually just go out there and I climb up on there with my fanny sticking up in the air, because I don't have a topside creeper I can use in the parking lot. And I'm starting to check it out because I got my starter button here where I can spin it over. And when I get in the truck, I'm going to be like the Sherlock Holmes thing. I'm going to look around, I'm going to see that he's got 2 fuel tanks, and he's got his fuel tank on the front tank. And I said, okay, this is, I'm going to leave this like it is for now. I'm not going to throw any wild cards in there. So I go to spinning it over, and after about 30 seconds of spinning it over and checking it for spark and fuel injection, everything is there. It fires up and it runs great. And I drive it around, and I can't get it to quit for loving her money. So I said, I don't know what we need to do to this, but it started up after I spun it about 30 seconds. And he says, well, okay, I'll take it and try it. Well, he gets in it, and before he gets out of the parking lot to the traffic circle, it's quit on him again. And he walks back in there and says, look at it, it's quit on me. And I says, okay, so I'll walk out there. I got in the truck, and I noticed he's still on the front tank, and I'm looking at this thing, and I decided I was going to ask this guy a couple of questions. I says, is there anything that you did besides just getting in this truck and driving it out here to the traffic circle? Did you do anything? He said, well, I switched it to the rear tank. I said, seriously? He says, yeah. And I says, and let me guess, when you switched it to the rear tank, it died. He says, yeah, but I switched it back to the front tank, and it didn't come back. And I said, well, watch what happens. And I spun it over for 45 seconds, and it fired up. And I said, you got water in your back tank, man. Why did you do that? I mean, he switched the tank on me every time. He switched it to the back and then he switched it back to the front, so when I got in, I saw it on the front. I see the front tank was fine. It's the one that's long and shaped like a cigar. The one in the back that's flat likes to gather water. How does water get in the gas tank? Anybody know?
Well, the gas tank sweats.
What about condensation?
That's what I'm saying, like it sweats inside.
Exactly, that's what you're saying. Whenever you get your gas tank, if you run your gas, who in here runs with your gas really low all the time? You keep yours full? You keep yours full?
Drive.
If you drive it really low, if you drive it with really low gas, you're going to have more of a chance of getting water in there. And a lot of times people just use the front tank and ignore the back one for a while until they decide they want to gas it up. So the long and the short of it was, there's another guy that come in there on a pickup truck, and he was talking about it running bad and all that kind of thing. And so I cleaned the injectors and all that stuff, got it all cleaned up for him, got it running good and everything. And then he came back and said it was running bad again. And I said, well, let me see what the fuel pressure is, just for the heck of it. And when I went to put the fuel pressure gauge on it, some gas got on my fingers and I smelled it and it was rotten. And I says, what tank are you running off of? He says, well, whenever you fixed it and it was running right, I had it on the front tank and then I switched it to the rear. And I said, well, the rear tank's got rotten gas in it, man. Don't you know that's gonna make it run bad? He says, well, I put, 5 gallons of really good gas in there with it. I said, well, let me ask you this, if you've got sour milk in the refrigerator, how much good milk do you got to pour in that sour milk before it becomes good milk? If you ain't going to make biscuits with it, you need to get rid of the old milk. You understand what I'm saying? So that's a bait and switch thing. He was actually switching it, trying to make it look like we weren't doing our job, I found out later, and he was trying to get something for nothing. The first guy was innocent of any wrongdoing, except he didn't give me all the information needed. The second guy was actually trying to stir up trouble. And so you'll see people like that sometimes. You ever have somebody do that to you? Don't worry, you will. It's coming. If you hadn't had it, you will have it, basically. All right. So anybody got any questions or comments? Everybody got a clearly defined objective when you come back Monday, right? Right. Work on your computer stuff. I know some of you guys got a lot to do, but work on your computer stuff. There's a heck of a lot of stuff that's got to be done before the end of the term. Some of you guys are behind. I have reset a lot of stuff that you weren't doing well on. Like if you made really lousy grades, I reset it so you could go back and make another run at it. And I sent some of you emails telling you that I'd reset it. But don't let that stuff fall behind, because that's a big chunk of your grade and all that. And make sure that we're, I'm not doing the daily test thing, but you need to get that stuff done because it's really important. That's only part of your theory, but you need to make sure you make it happen. All right. Y'all have a good weekend.